I'm Drew, and this is the Drew Petersen Podcast, home to one chairlift ride, ski pole microphone, and real story at a time. Today's chairlift chat is with Devon O'Neil, journalist and author of the new book, The Way Out. The Way Out is a story of survival right here in Colorado's Rocky Mountains. It takes place over an ordeal at Uncle Bud's hut that's just outside of Leadville in the Sawatch Range. But the story and the book goes much further than just one of adventure and accident in the mountains. And so that's where I took the interview with Devon, really to what it means to be human, to tell the truth, and to be real. So before we drop in, a quick note from this episode's sponsor. You know when you find that ski and everything's dialed and you think to yourself, nothing about this needs changing? Well, that was the QST line from Salomon. But guess what? The QST line got a full redesign this year. No, not because anything needed changing, but because Salomon knew that they could make it even better. They knew that they could make it more playful, more versatile, and more consistent across the board. Personally, I've been skiing the QST 106 for the past 8 years, ever since I joined Salomon. It's been one of my favorite skis, and this redesign made it even better. So if you're thinking about some new skis, click the link in the show notes, the newsletter, or on my website. I know it's an extra step, but clicking that link helps to support me, and it proves the value of this podcast to Salomon, and that makes it so that I can keep doing this whole thing. All right, let's raise the bar, keep your tips up, and drop in. Devon O'Neil, we're riding poly at A Basin, skiing some north-facing chalk, and we are here to talk about the book you released in November, The Way Out. I have to tell you that because I know all too well what accidents are like in the mountains and what loss is like in the mountains, I was skeptical. I used to be enchanted by, and I would seek out stories of accidents and survival in the mountains, and now I don't. I'm terrified of them, and I feel like there's often a romanticized version of the story. And in my experience, there's no romance in it. But in The Way Out, you do an amazing job of not romanticizing, not sensationalizing anything, but still making it a page turner, making it a book that I can't put down.
Thank you.
How do you think you did that?
I think I tried to allow for maximal learning opportunities and tried to impart just facts that might kind of resonate and sink in and that people might remember for a long time and potentially apply those lessons in their own life while humanizing every last detail, every last person. This is what I was trying to do, and honoring the people in the book. I think when we are vulnerable, as a lot of sources in this book are and were, and sharing their stories and their thoughts and how this thing had affected them over a period of years, there's an inherent fear of judgment and what will a reader potentially think of me for thinking that, feeling that, saying that, doing that. And we all make mistakes. And I tried not to shy away from the mistakes because those became the lessons. While also not hanging anyone out to dry. We are all fallible beings and we're humans. And I saw myself in so many of the mistakes that are in this book that I've made as well, or a parallel. And I think that I tried to leave as little room for judgment by delivering every crucial, nuanced detail in a responsible context as I could, and then let the reader decide what to take from it.
And I think that definitely comes through. I think with that is also the loyalty and also the dedication to truth that you have throughout. How do you maintain that dedication to truth, both in reporting on it, but then when you're writing about this in the realm of characters and of a community that you really became a part of during reporting?
Yeah, truth is really hard. True stories are really hard, from experience. And they expose us. And, the the truth is just really painful at times. And yet, if you have that as kind of the backbone to a story like this, certainly I tried to be fair to everybody, tried to, again, honor people, and show their character in full, so that a reader could relate and see themselves in the people in this book, so that it potentially could change their perspective or help them make a different decision the next time they're in a similar situation or whatever it is, just how we live, how we choose to live. But I think ultimately I was afraid of the truth at times in this when I would learn some things from really gracious sources who are brave and they're everywhere in this book. But when they would inform me on some of this stuff that was really hard for them to say and hard for me to hear, and then I would go home after interviews and be like, how on earth, what am I ever going to put that into a story? And yet, if truth is the backbone, we can live with truth. It's sometimes really hard to accept truth, but it has to be the backbone in a true story. And ultimately, the truth is the truth. Like, it doesn't change. We might remember it differently as time passes, but it never changes. It's always just what happened and what was said and what was done and how we felt. And I think we all struggle, myself included, to sometimes accept truth. And yet there's less to fear than our minds tell us there is in truth, and when people, a reader in this case, might read something that is true and that they can tell was hard. They respect people for sharing their truth. And I've heard that a lot from readers, is that they appreciated how honest everyone was and how honest the book is. And that really means a lot to me because it's something I tried to do for years with this thing.
It's interesting that you had that fear of truth while staying loyal to it. And that fear of truth is really similar to what I was feeling of that fear of the opposite of the romance of it. And I think the other thing that comes through in that too is the dedication to reporting. There are times in this book where I read a sentence and I can tell that a single sentence took a 1-hour interview to get right, to get accurate. And with that, thorough approach, like, how long did this book actually take?
I did my first interview in early 2019 and filed the final draft in early-ish 2025. So about 6 years. There was now a 3-year gap in there where the key eyewitness to this accident wasn't ready to talk. And so I sat on this and thought about it all the time, but really couldn't do much with it until he was ready to talk. And eventually he was. And then from then on, it was like 3.5 years of full-time reporting.
One, how many hundreds of interviews do you think went into 3.5 years? And two, in doing so, you're having really heavy, hard, difficult conversations, and people are exposing their raw selves to you. How were you taking care of yourself and your own mental health during that process?
It's a good question, and it's one I've gotten a few times. So I don't know how many interviews I did. I know I talked to somewhere around 120 different people, and that's not a lot for a book. A lot of books you'll read that the author interviewed 500 or 600 people, but this wasn't one of those kinds of books. What I was really fortunate for was that the real key sources gave me their time over a period of years. So I continued to get to see them, spend time with them, kind of like understand where they were at different parts of this. I think with trauma and grief, if you just get a short-term window, it's not as revealing, of course, stating the obvious, but as if you can see how that person moves through life over this longer term. And that's what I was really blessed with, was getting to know the sources in this book, especially those who were the closest to this accident. And they let me see them. That was like, it's such a privilege and an honor, and it comes with great responsibility. And I carried that stress for years. And, ultimately I would go down to Salida, was where most of the super intense stuff took place, although a lot in Leadville too. And I would spend a couple days there, or sometimes just one, and have these conversations that absolutely, you're right. They took a lot out of me, and I know they took a lot out of my sources, and I was always super grateful. But I would then have like this 90-minute drive home to where I live, just south of Breckenridge, and really just start to process and realize the toll that each one would take, because you're asking so much of someone. And also, in order for them to feel comfortable, absolutely, they should be able to see you. And so I would give them a window into where I was mentally, and that, that just, it takes it out of us, that. So ultimately, my wife, if we have one person in our lives that we can talk to about our hard things, that's really crucial. And it was really clear to me that some of the toughest guys in this story hadn't even discussed it with one person. And some of the kids who had been teenagers when this accident happened and now are in their young 20s or so, they had held on to a lot and really not gone there with even a single person. And that would come through in interviews. You see the pain that they've held on to, and the benefit of them talking. I mean, as a journalist, a reporter, like, you're kind of in this position of, you're this third party who's not connected personally to this story, but it's my job to ask questions. And then when it comes from someone whose job it is to ask questions, sometimes you're a little more comfortable giving a frank answer, whereas if it's your family member or a close friend, it feels maybe more like prodding or something. And I think it's really healthy to talk about this stuff, but it has to be with the right person and under the right circumstances and in the right environment. And so I did consider it part of my job to create that environment that would make people feel okay. Like, I'm not going to wield this in a dangerous way. And then it was on me to live up to that.
Yeah, definitely. And that honor and responsibility comes through, and you became that one person or that first person for a lot of these people. I think the other thing that stands out to me, kind of back to what sets this book apart, what makes it unique in terms of stories of survival in the way that you wrote it, is also the effort and care that you put into before the accident, before the story of the accident really starts, and then most importantly, the aftermath, and especially the emotional aftermath for the entire town of Salida, the community, the families. And what brought the clarity to that decision? And then what do you think was the greatest lesson you learned in doing so and focusing on that emotional aftermath?
Yeah, great question. That was something that wasn't in my kind of lens initially. And then it became clear that it deserved almost half the book, which is about how much space is allotted to it. But the aftermath of these things, usually we kind of read an accident report and we might read a news story and get a few quotes from somebody. And then we think, either they're destroyed or they're okay. And we don't get to see them on this arc, which is truly human. Like, that's the human part. The aftermath was the most human part to me. It's like, how does someone grapple with this thing that, for instance, like, they're blessed to have survived, or their family member survived, or their best friend or whoever it is, kind of got through this and made it out okay. But then how do you approach it with them? Because they're not okay just right off the cuff for the rest of their life. So people, I think, in Salida, went through this it's idiosyncratic, to each his or her own, how we deal with this hard stuff in our lives. But truly that became a huge part of this story. And that's why ultimately I thought I was reporting a magazine story initially for a while. And then eventually it just became clear that it needed the space and this time that only a book could afford. And so that it was very important to do that. And I'm just still super grateful that they trusted me enough to share that stuff.
Beautifully said. Beautifully done as well. Looks like they slowed the chair down for us so that we could get off. Thanks, guys. So we're going to go skiing, but I want to end this on a note for readers, because for me, I'm already recommending this book to so many friends and family. And the biggest reason I'm doing so is because how you focus and how you're honest about that emotional aftermath and the reality of not just life in the mountains, but life. that is what I took away. That's what I encourage other people to read it for. What do you hope that readers take away from that emotional standpoint?
I should say, Drew, like, that's what you just asked, like, how did it change you or affect me, you know? It made me think so much longer and harder and more deeply about what I want out of my own life, you know? And there's an accident of my own, very close call, that a friend and I experienced with a massive avalanche that's included in this book. It's in a chapter on whether our adventures are worth it. And I had viewed what I want out of life differently before that day. And that avalanche happened while I was like full on reporting this book. So it crystallized what I was reporting about, but also offered me this like kind of touch point where I reevaluated my own life. And it was certainly in the context of this accident that I was writing about, but it was also in the context of what I just experienced and felt in my own, you know, backcountry adventure. And I realized that what I wanted out of life was different from what I thought I wanted. And it took that hard kind of staring yourself in the mirror experience. But if we're truly honest, once again, it goes back to truth. If we're honest with ourselves about what do I really want out of life and what do I want versus what do I need, then I think we can understand ourselves better. And certainly I wanted to allow a reader to potentially understand others better who had gone through this kind of stuff. And, you know, it's so quick to judge or to imagine, you know, what they're thinking. And I think there's sometimes a hesitant approach to when someone you know has gone through a traumatic thing, especially a backcountry accident, but just any kind of loss or intense experience that changed someone. We're reluctant to acknowledge it, to bring it up, to talk about it, you know, and just a single sentence of acknowledgement goes so far. And that was another lesson I learned, just saying, I'm so sorry you went through that. I've been thinking of you. It doesn't have to be prophetic. It can be that alone. And it makes a difference in someone's life. And so that was a small thing, but I took that from it as well.
That feels like a good place to end this. That's something that I'm going to be left with when I reflect on the book, but also from today. Thanks for this, Devon.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate it, bud. Good to see you.
Thanks to Devon for joining me for a chairlift chat right here on Paolo Vicini. That conversation really felt like it epitomized why I started this podcast. It was no fluff. It was about being real. And frankly, that's what Devon's writing is too. Some of his writing in the past has had a tremendous impact on my life, especially his feature on Corey Richards in Outside Magazine. It seriously was one of the turning points for me to get help for my own mental health struggles. And I appreciate Devon's writing for how it can create change. And on that note, my greatest takeaway from that conversation was the through line of truth. And I think that that's a take home that I'm going to sit with for a long time. Not just in writing, in reading stories of magnitude like The Way Out, but in how I live my life, staying true to myself, and kind of like Devon was reflecting on at the end there. What's the life that I really want to lead? What's the life that I want to build? I seriously cannot recommend The Way Out enough. So please go pick up a copy and support Devon. You can also follow me and the show on Instagram at Drew Peterski, as well as subscribe to the show's newsletter on Substack. Also subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen or watch your podcasts. Also, thanks to this episode's sponsor, you can also check out all of the podcast sponsors and any discounts they may be offering you as a listener via the show notes, that newsletter, or my website, any point in time. I got to shorten this spiel, but that's it for this ride. Thanks for listening to the Drew Petersen podcast. Until next run, keep your tips up. Ski and enjoy, my friends.